So what do we, I don't mean to be contentious too quick off the bat, we could give it another half hour if you like, but what are we to do with the motu proprio from Pope Francis? How are we supposed to receive that when we don't want to?
Yeah, well, again...
Do we have to pretend? Do we have to pretend that we want to and that he's right?
The most important thing we need to do, and this applies particularly, I would say, particularly to trads, all right, is if we allow ourselves to get too angry, very quickly we lose charity. The only person that I trust to turn over the tables in the temple is Jesus Christ. If any of us start doing it, our anger very quickly leads to a lack of charity. And as soon as we lose charity, we're on the wrong side, even if we're saying the right things. So the first thing we have to do is prayerfully ensure that we are animated by caritas. And if we're not animated by caritas, we need to get the hell out of wherever we are to a better place. So we must not allow the Pope Francis motu proprio to make us angry. We have to resist prayerfully and charitably, and that will depend upon where we are, who we are, and our position in the church. But again, we must not succumb to anger, because anger leads to a lack of charity.
Yeah, I see a lot of Catholics today justifying their anger by pointing to Christ or pointing to St. Thomas, right, who says that anger is that passion that seeks to rectify a wrong. And they're correct in saying that. It's just that when we get angry because of our passions, we very usually slip into sinful anger. And analogously to that, I'm seeing a lot of Catholics, I include myself in all this, saying things like, we've got to be loving, but loving doesn't mean just saying nice things. And I want to be like, yeah, but when you start criticizing people, very quickly, you're not loving anymore. Does that make sense? How do we make sure we're actually being loving, given that loving doesn't just mean agreeing with or saying nice things? It can mean disagreeing strongly. It can mean being critical. How do we know that we have that spirit of love?
Well, to love, from a Christian perspective, is not an emotion, first of all. Anger is an emotion, and therefore it is in itself not rational. And fides et ratio, faith and reason, must be united. Love for a Christian is to freely choose to lay down our lives for the beloved. It's a rational choice. Freely choose to lay down love for the beloved, even if the beloved is our enemy. So how do we know we're loving the other person if he's disagreeing with us? Are we laying ourselves down self-sacrificially for them? Are we willing the good of the other? Or do we just basically say you're wrong and it's for your good that I'm telling you you're wrong, right? I mean, that might make us feel good, but is that actually authentically self-sacrificial love?
Yeah, I've often thought to myself, trying to kind of probe whether or not I'm being loving or appropriately critical. I think that there's been times where I would rather see, let's say, Joe Biden like humiliated, like at Holy Mass by being denied and like there being a big spectacle. Like there's part of me that would much rather that than some movement in the direction of Christian living. And I say that to my shame, but I also think I'm not unique in that. And I think that's kind of one way to be like, oh yeah, okay, that's not love. Like I should want his good and not want him to be embarrassed.
We should be praying for his conversion, in fact, what we should be doing. But I think, see, let's look at this on a purely pragmatic, practical level. Those lovers of tradition who have allowed themselves to become angry and have allowed that anger to spill over into words and actions that are not charitable are doing far more harm to the traditionalist movement than any liberal. So the point is that they're shooting themselves and other trads in the foot. If we can't love, that's exactly what allows the liberals in the church to point their finger and say, look, told you so. They're all a bunch of fascist nutcases. And of course, they're going to point the finger at the 5% that might apply to. And the other 95% they can be tarnished with that brush. But I want people to realize, if you really want the traditional mass to flourish, we have to become saints. Our job is to become saints. That's our only job. The only purpose of life is the quest for heaven. And are we getting closer to heaven, right? And if we're not growing in holiness, we're not helping the traditional cause. On the contrary, we're actually giving weapons to the enemies.
I think I agree with everything you just said. I think what makes it so infuriating for people is, you've heard of this term of gaslighting, where you try to make someone else seem like they're insane, So it's like, it's your problem. Even though you know it's not their problem, you're trying to get them to react. And, I think like a lot of people like myself who kind of came to the church in the late 90s or the early noughts, like we didn't have much experience of the traditional Latin Mass and traditional prayer. And those traditional people were just written off as kind of crazy, kooky people. And while you're seeing this kind of mass apostasy, is that too strong a word? This apostasy within the church, and the changing of the teachings of the church, people wishing to change them. So I don't fault on a natural level people kind of getting angry. I understand why they're getting angry. When you keep being told you're the problem, while the church is the church you love is falling apart, people are fleeing the church in droves.
Which is exactly what Benedict XVI treated. Those people had been forced into the ghetto, right? The traditionists were forced into the ghetto in the 60s and 70s. And the trouble with being forced into the ghetto, it's very easy to adopt and embrace a ghetto mentality, right? Everybody that's not in the ghetto is an enemy, and the ghetto is the only place that's authentic, right? So what Benedict XVI, authentically loving all the flock, he says we've got to bring these people out of the ghetto, right? We need to include them within the flock of the church and not ostracize them. And that was the purpose of the first Morum Pontificum, right? Is to bring the traditionists back into the fold and in the understanding that they are good Catholics for the most part, every bit as much as Novus Ordo Catholics for the most part, right? And as you say, you talk about vocations to the priesthood. You talk about attendance at Mass, and really, if you want to make a spectrum of it, the nearer you get to the traditional end of the spectrum, the higher the rate of vocations, the higher the Mass attendance, the higher the frequency of the sacraments. And the further you get to the liberal end, there are no vocations. The children drift away from the faith. It's an aging congregation. It's a shriveling congregation. I mean, this is why it's taken care of itself. I mean, I haven't checked these facts, but someone told me that the FSSP ordained more priests in Germany than the entire diocesan church in Germany.
I'd be willing to put money on that.
Yeah, so this is the Holy Spirit speaking. What other tangible empirical proof do you need? Than this data?
Yeah, I've been thinking lately, and I'd love your insight on this. What happens to a people when they radically change their central ritual overnight? So if a family's central ritual, let's say, is evening dinner, and it's something we've done every single day of our lives, it's where we come home, it's where we love each other, hear each other out. Suppose we were to alter that in the way that the traditional Latin Mass was altered. Okay, so you might say, okay, well now we kind of like, we stand around the stove and we kind of just eat hot dogs while we're standing, or something like that. What does that do to a family? And so, like, what is it doing to the church in the West when the central ritual has been so radically altered? Like, can a community survive something like that? Now, I know the answer is, well, yes, because you're a Catholic and you believe the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. But I mean, just maybe thinking about it more abstractly or theoretically, that seems to me to be a way. Well, what do you think?
Well, again, Benedict XVI, God bless him, right? He talked about the hermeneutic of rupture and the hermeneutic of continuity. Hermeneutic of continuity is tradition, right? As Chesterton says about tradition, it's the proxy of the dead and the enfranchisement of the unborn, right? It's the continuum through time. The Second Vatican Council did not sanction the hermeneutic of rupture, as Benedict XVI kept saying. If the letter of the Second Vatican Council had been kept to,
I agree.
We would not have had the rupture. What happened, the so-called spirit enabled all sorts of violations of the authentic spirit of Vatican II to happen. And that's that anarchy, which is not from God, that caused the rupture which followed in the 70s.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of people who criticize the Second Vatican Council haven't read the documents.
Right.
I mean, some have, of course, and have legitimate criticisms, perhaps. But they're very beautiful documents that clearly place Christ as king and there in the center.
I have not read them in a systematic way. I'm not a theologian. But insofar as I have read the documents, I've passed the documents, there's nothing I can think of at the moment that I've read in the documents of Vatican II that I'm actually have a big problem with.
No.
What the big problem is what people did in its so-called name, which is not in the council. In other words, these people are violating the teaching of the church.
Right. I do see the tide turning. I really do.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you met a young priest, let's say, who wanted there to be altar girls, or wanted there to be an allowance for contraception in certain circumstances, or thought the church should change their teaching on so-called female deacons or gay marriage, quote unquote. I haven't met one. Now, I know I'm more of a conservative Catholic, if you want to put a label on it, but I can't think of one successful YouTube channel that's pushing that, and I can't think of one young priest that wants that.
Yeah. Well, we talked earlier about the spectrum, about, from liberalism to tradition, and the nearer you get to the traditional end of the spectrum, the more vocations, etc.
Yeah.
But you could also do a different spectrum, young to old. And again, the younger the priest, they're far more likely to be more tradition oriented than the older priests. The Holy Spirit speaking, I really do think that these latest attacks on tradition are the last hurrah of the hippie generation. We ride this,
The death throes.
Yeah, the death throes. We ride this particular storm, which is why we don't have to panic. We don't have to panic. We don't have to overreact. We have to respond with charity, and we don't have to overreact, because time and the Holy Spirit will sort this problem out. And we're not God, and we won't sort the problem out. We just have to respond in charity to whatever challenges are thrown at us.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.